Welcome back to Bottom Line Africa. Thank you for staying with us. Now, the British Council's Future Leaders Connect aims to identify exceptional young people in the United Kingdom and across the world who have the potential to be future leaders of their countries in the fields of politics and policy, and who will be amongst the shapers of global policy making in the years ahead. This year, women outshone men as we have a chance to have a sit down with some of the finalists. I am now joined by Sahil Shah and Desma Natome, who will be telling us about the same. Welcome to KTN News, specifically Bottom Line Africa, and once again, congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Well, we'll start with the lady. Now, you are actually a policy analyst with the country's tax authority, that's KRA. Perhaps tell us how your experience actually helped in actually coming up with the carbon tax policy.
Yes, thank you very much. I think in the Kenya Revenue Authority under my office, I've actually been faced with challenges that triggers me to think and I'm asked questions. And you know, every single time we're developing policy, we need to ask ourselves, why are we doing this? Are we doing it for the better? What are the outcomes? Is it strategic? Is it going to be yielding into achievable results? I think given that I've been doing it at work and it's actually been very well, I also wanted to see how I can transition what I've learned into some of the interests that I also have, and environment is actually one of the main things I like and I have a lot of interest in. So I think I was just interested in trying to see what are we doing about our environment. Can we do better? Yes, I know we are a developing country and we can't really prioritize environmental initiatives, but then I'm also just thinking, are we, when we're not focusing on environment, is it because we don't have finances? Because I've been told we have policies that are in place, but most things are not being implemented. So I wanted to think of how we can get financing. How can we ensure that as we're developing, we're also developing with focus on environment? Because at the end of the day, if we develop and we don't put environment in focus, we're not developing sustainably.
Well, that's very true. Let's cross over to Sahil Shah, who works with the Kenya Business Guide, and your policy idea revolves around giving small business or small medium enterprises more incentives in order to create more employment opportunities. Kindly shed more light on this particular policy.
Yeah, so my idea really revolves around the private sector and private sector development in this country and in Africa in general. And the idea is that most smaller and medium-sized businesses in Kenya actually die within the first 2 years of their existence.
This is British Council Global Leadership Program in London, October.
Almost 100 people already within this network, and it is incredible for knowledge.
Remember?
Oh, you remember?
Yes.
Okay. You to it.
Program is revitalize the economy to focus on environment. Introducing environment as one of the agendas for ourselves as a developing country.
Well, that's very proper. Now, carbon tax, perhaps kindly shed light on this, because normally you might be familiar with this particular policy.
Okay, yes. So, initially, as I initially said, I want to finance our environmental agendas. And at the end of the day, I can't just go and say, I want to this, how am I going to get finances? And I also know that there are many things we can do, like for example our vehicles now, we're importing into our import duty rate. It's a percentage of the car of your car value, so it means that you're more likely to want to import importing
of unemployment in the country. Now, this is a pattern in importance of policy guidelines and how this can be used to combat unemployment.
Yes, so you're very right in saying around the incentives, but actually what we found through the Kenya Business Guide is where I work as an economic think tank, and our research has told us that it's in fact structural constraints that are holding back a lot of these businesses. And the fact that employment seems to be a solution pushed to everyone through entrepreneurship. So everyone is looking at mass entrepreneurship, starting their own businesses, etc. But the plain and simple fact is most people want stable jobs with a stable income. So the genesis of my idea is how do we scale up enterprises so that they can go from employing 10 people to 100, to 1,000, and scale the globe and the continent at large.
Well, that's very important. Now, you mentioned about getting this opportunity to go to London and represent Kenya and the importance of actually meeting various industry players in terms of policy. And this will impact you as an individual and also as a representative of the Future Leaders Connect, won't it?
Yes, certainly. I believe that the representation, not just of the British Council's program, the Future Leaders Connect, but Kenya at large, the world stage is very important. As everyone knows, Africa is the next growth frontier. All the money in the world is looking to Africa now. How do we better position ourselves, especially as Kenya, such a strategic country in the continent? How do we better position ourselves to absorb all this finance, all this money that's coming in towards business and the private sector?
Okay.
And I want to use this platform to ensure that Kenya has its voice. Young people in Kenya also have a voice at the global policy level.
Well, that's very important. As we perhaps conclude, Desmond Etome, apologies for your cough. Now, you're a policy analyst with Kenya Revenue Authority, and as we well know, tax at times is a challenge in terms of meeting whatever restrictions or levels that the government has put in place, because you're the official, you work in a capacity of the official, giving the government money. Now, perhaps even as you focus on environmental matters, highlight some of the challenges the tax collector in the country might face, and also in your capacity as a policy analyst, what do you actually do to help alleviate this situation?
So I think for that, I can actually say that when it comes to policy analysis, we need to also think about principles of a good policy before introducing it. But at the end of the day, we also realize that for Kenya to be fueled, or all the expenses for the government to run, we do need to get taxes. But at the end of the day, taxes is also dependent on whether people want to contribute their fair share of taxes or not.
Okay.
So I actually also believe that compliance, voluntary compliance, also is a very key thing in Kenya. I realize that tax might not be the most positive word, but if we want to reach towards the Vision 2030, we need to also contribute. If we want to get school fees for our children, we need to contribute to it.
Well, that's very important. Yes. Perhaps the last remarks as we finish off the interview. We've talked about what you expect from the summit that will be happening in London later on in October. And a lot of emphasis is put on on policy frameworks, but at the end of the day, the implementation is usually a problem. How do you perhaps plan on working through this particular problem, especially with the chance you've gotten through the Future Leaders Connect?
Yes, and you're very right to say that. In fact, the biggest problem that we have in this country is not actually policy formulation, it is policy implementation. Mm-hmm. And the real problem that arises in policy implementation is that when we're developing these policies, are we addressing the right issue? Remember that Kenya is not disconnected from the entire world. We don't live in a silo. Policies across the world, especially in Britain and in the West, affect our day-to-day activities and our economy. Mm-hmm. Thereby, we need to also include our voice at that level so that we can incorporate our sentiments there, and then that makes it easier to cascade at the local level. But fundamentally, what we should be working on is developing networks within the country, across the bureaucracy, across the political space, that have a similar vision for this country, so that the will is there to implement.
Well, thank you so much for making time, and all the best as you actually represent October, a policy analyst at Kenya Revenue Authority, the country's tax authority, so have Shah, business side, and who has actually the policy create more employment activities. Thank you so much for making time, even as we